When common sense takes a vacation, the results can be fatal and hilarious. From fireworks turning someone into a human candle to the guy who decided to test a bulletproof vest the hard way. And let's not forget the Casanova who used glue to get busy. Is it a super controversial take to say that you probably shouldn't treat guns like toys? That's a lesson that Daniel Wright from Gary, Indiana learned the hard way back in 2005. Our story begins where a lot of stupid things have happened, outside of a liquor store. Daniel and some buddies were getting lit when he slid on his new bulletproof vest, eager to show his friends just how effective it was. So effective that he gave one of his friends a 20-gauge shotgun and told them blast him with it at point-blank range. What? It's a totally chill, normal thing for friends to shoot each other outside of a liquor store. Anyway, Daniel was lethally wounded when the blast tore through his jacket. It turned out that Mr. Wright, in his infinite wisdom, had bought a flak jacket, designed for surviving fragments of high explosives, and not a bulletproof vest. He was dead within 2 hours. Daniel's death was so phenomenally dumb that his friends panicked and they claimed a mystery gunman had assassinated him, a lie that landed them in legal hot water, all because Daniel bought the wrong vest. And speaking of stuff that wouldn't stop bullets, let's talk about MacBooks. Extremely useful in an office, not so useful on a battlefield. As one unfortunate Russian soldier on the battlefields of Irpin, Ukraine discovered firsthand back in 2022. Being a soldier doesn't pay all that well, but if you are sleazy enough, you can have great perks, like getting to rob and pillage the homes of people you're invading. This was something that this unnamed Russian soldier realized when he happened upon a MacBook, but he didn't have anywhere to carry it. So he took the initiative to remove one of the ballistic plates of the armor on his chest and he slid the MacBook into the pocket instead. That probably felt like a bargain, all those rubles saved on a brand new computer, right up until a Ukrainian bullet tore through the laptop and the thief behind it. But Ukrainians often get it as good as they give it with bizarre Darwin Award deaths. This was the case with a chemistry student back in 2009 who attended the Kyiv Polytechnic Institute and had a strange habit. He compulsively chewed gum. But that's not all. He loved to dip that gum in citric acid for a little bit of a flavor boost. It's a pretty weird thing to develop a taste for, but when you're a chemistry student around a variety of dangerous chemicals, it becomes extremely weird. And during one extremely unfortunate accident, that student, identified only by his first name, Vladimir, mistook some unknown explosive compound for citric acid and decided to give his gum a little zing. People around the college heard an explosion and they ran in to check. They found Vlad with the bottom half of his face blown off, and he didn't survive for long after that. Maybe don't dip your gum into weird chemicals. Not sure who needs to hear that, but we guess it's a message we could all take home with us. But let's not leave the world of dumb deaths in Europe just yet. You ask anybody in Europe and they'll tell you that nothing sucks more than a Brit on vacation. They're rude, they're inconsiderate, and they expect every restaurant to serve fish and chips. One of these so-called Brits abroad was David Monk back in 2008, who was on a skiing vacation in the Italian Alps. After he and some buddies got loaded on that primo Italian booze, they headed up to the ski slope to have a little after-hours fun. But there was only one problem. They didn't have any skiing gear. But before they could go off-piste to piste off, Monk had a genius idea. What if he removed one of the rubber mats from the ski barriers so they could slalom down the slope with that? And you could really pick up some speed on that thing, as Monk found out the hard way when he skidded right into the barrier that he had just removed the mat from, suffering multiple injuries leading to his death. Truly specialist stuff. Though it is not even close to the craziness of what's coming up next. You'll find that a lot of people get killed when they try to do cool daredevil stuff in front of their friends. 23-year-old Tyler Pinkley met an untimely end when he decided to have some fun with fireworks in front of his horrified friends. Specifically, he lit a mortar firework and he held it up above his head. When his friends begged him to reconsider, Tyler told them he would be fine. He'd done it before. Shortly after that, his head was on fire, and then he was dead. Another particularly dumb case of this happening back in 1997 made all the local papers. An aspiring bungee jumper named Eric Barcia decided that he didn't need to go to official classes, and he just freestyled the whole thing himself. What could possibly go wrong? Eric was going to bungee jump off a bridge in Reston, Virginia, and he was real precise about the whole affair. He bought a number of bungee cords and he started tying them together, figuring he'd need about a combined 70 feet of cord to safely make the jump off the side without hitting the bottom. Well, the problem was Eric forgot to account for the fact that, bungee cords stretch, realizing that was probably his last thought before his brains became one with the concrete. But plunging to your death during a failed attempt to bungee jump isn't nearly as embarrassing as doing the same thing while trying to play into a cringy internet trend. Remember planking? It's okay if you don't. It was a huge thing back in 2011. People would lay down in a rigid position, kinda like a plank, normally in a place where it would be weird, inconvenient, and dangerous to do it. In other words, anywhere that isn't your bed. A man living in Brisbane, Australia, ended up dying while trying to achieve planking supremacy. He tried to plank on the balcony of a 7th-story window, where he lost his balance and then tumbled down to the ground. Paramedics tried to revive him, but he was lost within 20 minutes of the fall. He probably got really good at planking when his rigor mortis set in. Sticking with the theme of the endless war between human beings and gravity, we need to wind the clock back to October 2010 and head over to the nation of South Korea. This is where one man's frustration at a lack of accessibility led to him having a Darwin-worthy demise. At a shopping center in Daejeon, a 40-year-old man in a motorized wheelchair known only as Mr. Lee was approaching an elevator when the doors slid shut right in front of him. We don't know what kind of day he was having before that, but it must have been a frustrating one because he started ramming his wheelchair up against the doors. And then he did it again, causing the doors to rattle from all the stress. And then he did it one more time, and the doors broke. Mr. Lee tipped forward and fell down a 19-foot shaft to his death. If only he were just a little more patient, he wouldn't be counted among the Darwin Award crew. But that is nowhere near as weird as our next one. Back in 1998, an Argentinian man named Luis Alberto Camargo was in the middle of throwing his wife out of a window. And that's not even the death here. Luis and his wife were just having an argument when things went from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. But lucky for the wife, she landed on some nearby power lines without getting shocked. Those held her up in place and saved her from her fall. Luis must have had a last-minute change of heart. Or maybe he just wanted to finish the job. He jumped out of the window after his shell-shocked wife, but missed the power lines and fell to his death. She, meanwhile, was rescued without incident. Our next story is a lot more tragic. Sometimes your relentless drive to get those gains might lead your family experiencing losses. As the family of a 61-year-old man who died early in 2025 found out, while accompanying his wife for an MRI, he graciously helped her off of the table. But he must have missed that memo about not bringing any metal objects in when approaching an extremely powerful magnet. But he wasn't just carrying some loose change or a pen. No, he was wearing a 20-pound weight training chain around his neck. The second he approached his wife, he was dragged toward the MRI at rapid speeds and killed in the process. There are plenty of ways our favorite hobbies can get you killed. Some are more stupid than others. One particularly dangerous hobby is riding a motorcycle, and we're not actually talking about motorcycle accidents here. Early in 2025, an Italian motorcyclist, Omar Farangzin, was riding a famously beautiful road in Romania when he happened upon an adorable brown bear. He even took some selfies and videos with furry animals to mark the special occasion. A day later, he made the terrible mistake of trying to feed a mother bear and got dragged into a ravine and eaten alive for his trouble. Now, if you've seen The Revenant, just picture that, except without the part where he lives at the end. Don't mess with mama bears. That's something you really should learn if you ever plan on going vacation to Romania, or like anywhere with bears. But you don't really need to go all the way to Romania to have a bizarre, gruesome, and downright dumb death on the roads. You could ask a certain 19-year-old road worker from Oklahoma if he hadn't been made one with the very roads he worked on. Back in 2020, he was helping to pave a new area of road when he noticed asphalt on the tires of the pavement roller he was operating. So he did the sensible thing and he climbed out of the vehicle to lube up the tires with some diesel. But in the process, he fell over and the pavement roller just went right over him. He was proclaimed dead at the scene. Because when the only way to get you out of the ground is with a big spatula, it's safe to say you're probably not alive. Think getting flattened by heavy machinery is gruesome? Sorry to say that doesn't even hold a candle to this next horrifyingly stupid death. A man in Indiana with two passions, sex and solvent abuse, fused the two in the most upsetting way imaginable. Back in 2021, this fellow was getting amorous with his lady friend when he realized that there wasn't a condom in sight. But he wasn't the kind of irresponsible guy to have unsafe sex. No. Thankfully, seeing as the two of them were already having some fun sniffing different epoxies and resins, he decided that these wonder chemicals could pull double duty in getting him high and keeping him safe. So he glued his third eye shut. Now, you may be feeling years getting actively stripped off of your life from the sheer psychic image of hearing that, but not as many years as were instantly stripped off of this poor young pervert. He was rushed to the hospital and died of multiple organ failure from a mix of inhaling the various chemicals and then using them as the world's most dangerous prophylactic. It's important to wear protection, whether we're talking about in the bedroom or out on the road. Philip A. Contos' bizarre decisions turned him into road pizza in 2011 when he took part in a protest in New York. What was he protesting? Civil rights, an end to the war, or world hunger? Policies to combat the ongoing threat of climate change? Nope, he was protesting mandatory helmet laws for bikers. The very helmet that may have saved his life after going over the handlebars during the protest, where he smashed his head and died. Remember the unfortunate Italian guy who got eaten by a bear in Romania? Plenty of people die Darwin Awards deaths after being irresponsible with animals. But that goes double when you add social media into the mix. This all came together like a perfect storm to send a 28-year-old man in Thailand off to the next life. He was found dead in a resort room with 2 telltale pieces of evidence: a snake bite on his upper arm and a live cobra with a bound-up mouth sitting inside a plastic bag. So what on earth happened here? Investigators found the answer when they looked at the man's phone, where he had recorded multiple videos of himself playing with the snake for that hot content on his socials. He did end up going viral, ironically, but only as that dumb guy who died because he handled a deadly snake for social media. This next death is one we do feel kind of bad about. Deepak Mahabar was by all accounts a really nice guy. When someone in his area reported a snake in their home, he would swoop in, remove the snake at no charge, and release it back into the wild. But after one snake rescue, Mahabar realized he needed to go pick up his kid from school. So to save time, he wrapped the snake around his neck to motorcycle off to his kid's school. This would be the mistake that led to his downfall. That snake that he'd wrapped around his neck was venomous, and over the course of the ride, it had bit him. He sadly died the next morning. It's an important reminder that no matter how much experience you have, you should never get too comfortable handling wild animals. But you don't need to get wild to die a stupid Darwin-worthy death. It's just as likely to happen in your own backyard. Take John Lewis of Minterworth, England in 1999, who decided to just do a little lawn work. He trimmed his shrubs, he put all the trimmings into a neat little pile, which he then doused with gasoline. You might think you know where this one is going, but trust us, you don't. He threw a lit match onto this gasoline-soaked tinder pile and it immediately exploded. And because of course it did, it set John on fire. He needed to put this blaze out fast or he would be his own last garden barbecue. But thankfully there was a river nearby, so he just jumped in, putting out the fire and saving his life. Well, from the fire, anyway. Because John, in all of his haste to stop himself from burning to death, forgot that he couldn't swim and he promptly drowned. His body was carried off a few miles downstream before anybody found it. If it makes John feel any better though, his wasn't the most embarrassing death caused by gasoline. That would be down to leaded gasoline's inventor, Thomas Midgley Jr. Well, we know today that leaded gasoline was a toxic nightmare that literally made people dumber and more violent. Back then, people had no idea. Midgley Jr. was so convinced that it was safe that he spent his entire life in close proximity to it, and he saw his health get worse and worse. Later on in life, he caught polio, which left him severely disabled. He built a complicated system of ropes and pulleys to give him some kind of mobility, even in his bedridden state. But his overcomplicated system was exactly what killed him in the end. He got tangled up in it and strangled himself in 1944 at the age of 55. It's long been a debate whether it'd be more painful to burn or drown to death, and that's been a hard one to settle given that nobody has ever experienced both and lived to tell the tale. But one thing that is worse than either is experiencing one of them with the added humiliation that was all due to a stupid mistake. Just ask Peter Völgyi, both former deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers in Hungary and former living person, after a visit to a metalworking factory in Miskolc back in 1973. It was a typical photo op, really. Politician shows that he cares about the common working folk by putting on a hard hat and touring a workplace for a few hours. But the unfortunate deputy chairman took a little too close of an interest in the most dangerous part of the factory, the casting pit. That's the area where they put the impossibly hot liquid metal into large molds so they can cool it into different shapes. As Pitar admired his future death pit, a crane suddenly lurched out of control, shoving him straight into the casting pit. He landed between two of the molds and got absolutely charred, his suit burning all the way to his skin. They managed to rescue him after a lot of time and effort, but sadly he died after a period of agonizing pain in the hospital. Speaking of politics, let's go to the weird world of war, which lends itself to a lot of unpleasant and stupid deaths. War can be so dangerous that even pretend TV shows about war can get people killed in stupid ways. American director Boris Sagal had a completely avoidable death while filming the 1982 TV miniseries World War III. When trying to get into his private helicopter, he approached from the rear and then just walked straight into the helicopter blades, partially decapitating the unfortunate director. Seagal's death came from not looking where he was going. Our next death came out of sheer unbridled rage. Back in 2020, two men in New South Wales, Australia got into a road rage incident. Well, rather than trying to work it out, they decided to park it on the side of the highway and get out to engage in a fistfight. But karma for dropping their social civility came swiftly, as a fast-moving truck accidentally collided with both men at once as they battled it out in the middle of the road, killing them instantly. The trucker was in shock after that, but if he was able to pull himself together and get one more, he would be eligible for a kill streak. Sometimes men of God aren't necessarily God's favorite people, which is why you will find a lot of preachers with bizarre Darwin Award deaths, like Kyle Lake of Waco, Texas, who died a totally unnecessary death back in 2005. While delivering a sermon during a baptism, he fully immersed the person in water, and then, noticing the congregation struggling to hear him, he reached out to adjust the microphone on the stage. And this was why Lake received a fatal electric shock in front of his entire audience. But phenomenally stupid deaths aren't a modern invention either. We have found people causing their own totally avoidable doom as early as 1601, including the death of astronomer Tycho Brahe, who was the last major astronomer before the invention of the telescope. Tycho was already a man that maybe didn't have the best judgment despite his intelligence. He had a history of getting into duels. He even had a metal prosthetic nose for the better part of his life after getting the top half of his original nose cut off. But despite being a duelist, he was undeniably extremely polite. And so it was his politeness, not his history of dueling, that got him killed. He was attending a banquet in Prague when knocking back a little too much wine led to him needing to go to the bathroom. Etiquette rules were a lot more serious back in 1601, and Tycho didn't want to embarrass himself by leaving the party to go drain the sea monster, so he stuck it out until he didn't even need to pee anymore. He then died 11 days later in excruciating pain, likely from a severe bladder infection caused by refusing to pee. Nothing ruins the vibe of a dinner party quite like realizing after the fact that you literally held it in until it killed you. But that is still not as embarrassing as the death of the famous English statesman Francis Bacon, who was always trying to figure things out. You would think that this death would be related to one of his more dangerous experiments, maybe trying to invent a new weapon or energy source. But no, he was trying to preserve a chicken. He would die 25 years after Tycho Brahe after stuffing a bunch of snow into a chicken to see if it would preserve the meat for later consumption, which was a really new idea at the time. Sadly, the only result of this experiment was Francis Bacon catching a deadly case of pneumonia. Speaking of historical figures who died pointless and humiliating deaths in the cold, let's talk about the United States' most inconsequential president. The death of William Henry Harrison was sealed during his 1841 inauguration speech. He had been exhausted from a long campaign, and he ignored the advice of his counsel to wear winter clothes for the freezing weather. But President Harrison decided he would just rough it, and in the process he caught pneumonia, and he died not long after. This made him the president with the shortest term in U.S. history. Now how about we lighten things up with another thoroughly stupid animal-related death? While swimming near the Texas-Louisiana border, 28-year-old Tommy Woodward and a female friend came across a body of water marked with a sign that said "No swimming." Warning of gators. But Tommy, he wasn't worried. He stripped down and jumped in anyway. And he was obviously eaten by those gators. Now if you think these deaths are wild, wait until you see what happens when sunshine, bad decisions, and danger come together. Check out Dumbest Ways to Die Florida Edition, or click on this video instead.